The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. Now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information.
Good day, everyone. I want to thank Yuri Bezmenov for that amazing intro. And I want to thank you for joining me for this presentation. I want to thank the individuals in the Freedom Under Natural Law Conference, the organizers, all of the presenters, all of the watchers, anyone that donated, anyone that helped spread this, held knowledge, this conference. I want to thank you for doing what you did. My name is Brandon Spencer, and I'm going to present Devoid of Consciousness, Lacking Consciousness. Now, before we jump in, I just want to make it clear that it's extremely hard to try to present and pack a lot of knowledge into an hour-long presentation. So I'm not going to be able to cover everything. I may be moving kind of fast, but just know that it's extremely hard to try to pack in so much knowledge into just one presentation that only lasts an hour. So I always want to be clear. All right, so let's dive into it. As always, before we begin, these presentations may not be for everybody. I make that clear, and I told I understand that a lot of us are different. So you may not like my style. You may not like this particular flavor. That's totally fine. I get that. My presentations are just aiming to get to the root cause of the human condition and why it's still the way that it is. Why it's still slavery. So if you don't particularly like those words, that's totally fine. That's upon you to deal with. So also too, if you're not familiar with some of my previous work, Lex Naturalis, and why natural law is not a religion, then I would highly encourage you to, check out those presentations, after you are done watching this amazing conference. But it will just kind of open up, to what I am talking about when I'm talking about, these terms, so people can get, good definitive understanding on how I'm coming from when I'm sharing, my views on these truths. And then also too, like, there is nothing new that needs to be said or presented here. I'm not going to be presenting anything new. Nothing new even needs to be done. Humanity just needs to, look at the tools that are needed to get, itself out of this slavery condition. The solution has always been present, and it will continue to be the same. Care for truth, seek the truth, embody the truth, and teach the truth, as Chris Nielsen has always explained about in his work. And as the great Manly P. Hall said, the quest for truth is a lifelong journey, and the search for meaning is what gives life purpose. I'm going to say that again. The quest for truth is a lifelong journey. The search for meaning is what gives life purpose. So, as always, starting off, I like to break down the terms that I'm going to be using to give people a good idea on what I am, trying to portray, the ideas that I'm trying to get them to think about, coming from a concrete, held definitive knowledge in held definition. So these are the meanings that I come to know these words are from, not just going, by what I believe or what I perceive them are. These are the definitions of these words. So hell, again, it's important to understand these words, because when we are trying to convey this information, if we don't have this even understanding of definitions, then we will always misjudge context. We will always take things and misrepresent them, and not truly understand what these words are truly meaning in reality. So that creates a lot of confusion. So we should always be defining our terms, and of course, understanding the etymology of these words, and what these words really mean in reality. That way we can come to understand things in reality better. And what better way than etymology and definition? So when I'm using the word devoid, what does that mean? You're lacking, not possessing, to remove, to void, to vacate. Something isn't present, something isn't there. So what is devoid? Conscious. Or what is conscious? Knowing what is right, to know together, knowing what is moral, knowing what is morally right. Together, science, to know, conscience, to know together. Well, what should we be knowing? That which is morally right. And that's why we say conscience, he or she followed their conscience, because there is only conscience, but there are different levels of consciousness, which is the next word. So what is consciousness? Knowing, being aware, the quality, the state of being, of knowing, being aware of your existence. So the state of being aware. So those are the definitions that I am using for explaining these words. The beginning of all wisdom is the definition of terms. Socrates. The beginning of all wisdom is the definition of terms. Why is it that humanity refuses to dig itself out of the condition known as slavery? Why is it? Again, trying to get to the root, right? Why do we still see so much man-made suffering worldwide? Why is it that nothing ever truly changes for the better? We have to ask ourselves, why is it that nothing truly really changes? We keep doing the same thing over and over and over and over, but nothing truly changes. Nothing truly ever really materializes. Why is it? We should be getting to the root, the reason, the cause. And why is it that man continues to engage in behaviors that do not benefit man and his environment? Why is it? We have to ask ourselves the question, why? Now, man can believe in many ideologies, but there are certain ideas, certain belief structures that are very destructive, that always lead to the same result in manifestation, over time. Particular ideologies have always been at the heart of the destruction of societies from within, and certain particular ideologies have been portrayed and symbolized in many, mainstream Hollywood movies. Like in Lord of the Rings, you had the Eye of Sauron, being portrayed as authority, because people always want to wield that ring. People think they can always wear and manage that ring. People think they can always, put man's law over the natural laws. So what is at the main particular root of this ideologies that we have seen that are so destructive? Moral relativism. Moral relativism is that ideology, along with solipsism, of course, but moral relativism has always been at the heart and destruction from societies from within. Whenever you saw great societies fall, whenever you saw societies collapse from within, moral relativism was at the center. Moral relativism is that destroyer. Moral relativism is what destroys freedom, because it prevents the conditions of freedom. It keeps them dormant. It keeps them dead. Moral relativism kills the ideas so that freedom can't grow within the mind. It is the belief that morality is relative to some particular standpoint or degree, relative based on time, relative based on culture, relative based on situation, relative based on race, relative based on class, relative based on religious sect, relative based on who's in authority, in charge, who's in power, or relative based on the position in society. We still have cultures all over earth, that still fall into this relativistic mindset when it comes to trying to dictate morality based on these these positions in society. To some degree, you believe morality is relative. You believe man can create or change what is moral. At some degree, at some level, if if you subscribe to moral relativism, you believe that man at some level can change what is moral and what is right. And that right there is one of the hallmarks of every tyrannical civilization, every tyrannical government, all forms of external government. Moral relativism. Moral relativism is a mind virus. It is a mind virus. It is a mental virus that invades one's perceptions, one's thinking. It penetrates and creates worldviews, distorted worldviews. It distorts how you view yourself. It distorts how you view others. And it also will distort your behaviors. It is fueled by the ego and selfishness. The mind virus is not only controlling and shaping the way you think, it is also controlling one's behaviors. Because your behaviors are going to be shaped largely on how you think. So moral relativism is one of the mind viruses that creates that physical, violent structure of authority. That's why whenever you start putting people in charge, in positions of power, in positions of authority, you know that the mental virus of moral relativism is there and being spread. Because at the heart of all external authority, of all man-made authority, is this mind virus of moral relativism. That the king can determine what's right. The president can determine what's right. The Führer can determine what's right. The Pharaoh can determine what's right. The judge can determine what's right. Every culture in society subscribes to this mind virus at some degree, at some level. A believer with this virus will try to justify wrong behaviors because, hell, again, at some degree, at some level, they find morality to be relative. So then, therefore, they will always try to justify their quote unquote relative morality, which can't be done. This infested mind will lie, cheat, use duress, coerce, steal, and even murder to uphold and protect the structure of authority. That's why it's like a virus, because it will protect itself. It spreads its tentacles out, and it has means of, sadly, self-defense, because the ones who are stuck like with this mind virus will defend it. They'll defend it physically till death. Because that's what we've always seen with cults, with this mind virus of moral relativism. They will defend it and even use violence and transgress against you when you haven't done anything wrong. Because we're dealing with a mental virus that poisons the soul, that poisons the heart. they will try to uphold and protect this structure of authority that's being violent against them. This authority is their God. This is why they will go to war against anyone who doesn't share their infected ideology, just as a cult mindset would. Now, you want to talk about, real infection? You are willing to defend your own enslavers, the ones who were enslaving you. You're willing to defend them and sacrifice your body for them. That's what we see. That's why this virus is so dangerous, because it just mutates and spreads and spreads and spreads into the collectivist mindset. Because that's really what we're just talking about here is the collectivist mindset. It's been called many things. It's been called the satanic mindset. You can call it like the narcissistic mindset. You can call it the egoic mindset. It's all just moral relativism, if we're not bullshitting. It's just individuals who try to justify and think that they can change what's moral. That's, that would benefit them. So again, let's bring some more clarity. What does the word moral mean? We're not talking about what you think it means. Like, what does the word mean? Well, let's go to etymology. Right, behavior, from Latin, moralis, proper behavior of a person in society. Not just society, but a proper behavior of an individual in reality. What's moral, what's right? How do you conduct and condone your behaviors when you get around, groups of people? That's what's moral, the right behaviors. Because when we get around groups of people, we start to harmonize, or we're going to disharmonize. So how do we learn this form of harmonization? Well, we observe the behaviors on how people act in groups that bring about that harmony. That we would deem those behaviors as something moral because they are right. Bring about more of that behavior. Bring about more of that energy. Moralis. These are the proper way of doing things and condoning in the ethical, group-like setting. So we're talking about behaviors in a group dynamic. A relative, from Latin, relativus, having reference or relation, from Latin, relatus, bring back, bear back. So how can we build or construct things in reality if we can't come to a basic understanding on which behaviors are moral and immoral? Because to the more relativist person, they'll always try to justify and try to bring back or go back or change what is moral, which is the right behaviors in society, which can be observed, which can be understood, which can be weighed and measured and validated in reality. So we know that there's such a thing as moral behaviors. So we have definitions, because the more relativist person will always try to go back on what is moral. And then, like I stated earlier, moral relativism has been described in so many different ways. It's been symbolized in so many different forms. It's been talked about by pretty much like every ancient culture. The Native Americans described something that was similar, an aspect of the mind virus called Watiko. And this was like a psychic, spiritual pathogen that contaminated the soil. Of course, the soil, being the inner, how the inner kingdom, the inner garden. And then that pathogen will spread throughout, like the subconscious going unseen, forcing people to act against one's conscience. So what are we talking about here? To go against one's conscience, to disobey conscience. You're talking about doing immoral things. We're talking about behaviors in reality, behaviors in groups, behaviors in a group dynamic. So we're talking about moral and immoral. So to go hell against your conscience means you're probably going to do something that is hell immoral. So what Tico was a aspect or similar to moral relativism. You can call it an occult or hidden mind virus, because they always talked about it would be hidden, consuming more and more minds as it spreads throughout all aspects of society. Moral relativism is similar to that virus of Helwetico. How can I exploit others for my gain? How can I get more? More ego, more greed, more consumption, more control, more. And they also talked about how there was like no description of Helwetico. It was no being. It was just like this spiritual vampire or like this spiritual energy that would possess the individual. It lived in the human psyche. So a moral relativist will always find a way to justify the violation of property rights. They'll try to come up with all the justifications to try to violate another person's property rights. And a lot of them have never even really thought that far. They're just going off conditioning. They're just going off of programming. So this is the main core understanding of what rights are and what they are not. So if we don't have a simple basic understanding of property rights, we can't coexist. We can't come to harmonize. We can't come to build. We can't come to learn things. We can't learn to communicate, because you'll always try to find a way to violate my property, and I will always find a way to defend my property. Just like we all should find a way to defend our property from violators who try to transgress upon our property rights. But you see, when you have this mind virus, you don't care for the truth. You don't care for facts. You don't care for property rights. You don't care for principles. And you will transgress upon others, just like an infected mind virus would do. So how can we build? How can humanity come to solve its problems? How can we learn to build? How can we be neighbors if we can't agree on fundamental principles of property? It will always just lead to more confusion and cataclysm. Because rights are a form of property that must be defended at all times, in all places. They have to be defended. So, what is slavery? What is slavery? The state of servitude, a false claim upon another person's body, the false claim of the fruits of one's labor. It is backed by threats of duress, violence, and coercion. So, if we look at how slavery can manifest in different forms, because you can have physical slavery, you can have mental slavery, you can have spiritual slavery, you can have psychological slavery. So in the physical slavery was physical slavery that happened to many, how different cultures and how different groups of people made a false claim of ownership, made a false claim of the fruits of the slave's labor, backed by threats of divorce. Backed by threats of duress and coercion and violence. It was rooted in moral relativism and the belief in authority. It kept subjects in a state of internal contradiction. Let's look at the government and how it enslaves its so-called citizens. It makes a false claim of ownership. It says what you can and cannot put into your body. Makes a false claim of the fruits of your labor with taxation. It's enforced by threats of duress, coercion, violence, and imprisonment. Be fined, be thrown in a cage. Is rooted in moral relativism. We've already explained that because, based on who's in charge, based on the politicians who are in charge, they get to determine what's moral. The belief in authority keeps its subjects in a state of internal contradiction, because people who believe in government are in a state of internal contradiction. They are in a state of internal confusion. They are in a state of delusion, because they are in a state of hypnotism. And then you also have what has been described as pimp culture, which is just another form of slavery. Makes the false claim of ownership, makes the false claim of the fruits of the woman or man's work, backed by threats of Devoid of duress, coercion, violence, and fear, rooted in moral relativism and the belief in authority, because they believe that the pimp has more power, keeps the man or woman in a state of internal contradiction. So it's still like the same. It's still like the same mechanisms when it comes to slavery. Doesn't matter if it's physical. Doesn't matter if it's mental, which you can't have physical slavery without the mental slavery, or if it's just emotional. It's the same tactics. It's the same. It's the same principles that are at play here. The same principles. No matter how you look at it, slavery is a false claim of ownership. Use fear, use tactic of manipulation, use coercion, use threats. Keep them in a state of fear. Keep them in a state of ignorance. So this part is called the demoralization process in action, and I call this slide the cremation of care. And when I'm describing it, I'm not just talking about a particular ritual at the Bohemian Grove or like at the Bohemian Club. I'm talking about the collective involvement that in the individuals partaking when it comes to these massive, like group rituals. Rather it could be certain ceremonies that come on television or be at music festivals or like at large gatherings. These are what I would consider like more darker type, like cremation of care, hell events that people partake in like unknowingly. They dedicate their time, they dedicate their hell attention to these dark rituals, and these rituals are usually tailored to, the cremation of care, destroying people's, hell ability to empathize, like destroying their spiritual, hell nature, destroying their care, destroying their empathy, destroying their will, destroying their hell ability to think outside the box. So these are symbolic representations of that hell destruction being, showcased all over the television and government and, hell mass media in education. And I just call all those, from a collective standpoint, the cremation of care, because all of those interactions, all of the energy is being contributed toward a dark purpose. So the many ways society is being led astray, because that's exactly what's happening. Like the Pied Piper, we're just following those tunes, being led. Of course, religion is one of the many ways, possibly one of the biggest way, that more relativistic, dogmatic ideology has been, brought about into man's consciousness. Religion has been one of the biggest spreaders of this mind virus. Each religion claims to have its code or doctrine of morality. All the religions claim to have, their own particular code when it comes to morality. So which is correct? Which are you supposed to choose from? Which are you supposed to know, which is the correct code? If each particular sect has their own, specific code that you were supposed to adhere to. This code of doctrine usually comes from a book, text, or a prophet. These individuals do not hold their insiders to that specific code, so they're hypocrites. It's always, do as I say, not as I do. So religion wants you to believe in this code and not discover what true morality is. They want you to believe in this, religious doctrine, but don't hold their own individuals held accountable. A lot of these religious contradict themselves in their so-called code, so, hell again, you are contradicting yourself in what you say by what you are doing. So there is some form of disconnect. There is some form of duality going on here. You're not harmonized. Each sect may and will have different variations of this code or doctrine lacking consistency. We see this in, like Christianity. They all have like different, codes and, like have different subjective interpretation when it comes to certain things. So which are you supposed to follow? Does that not create more confusion? Because hell, it does. These codes may not involve the death of another's property rights, therefore distorting rights as wrongs. So these codes may not necessarily involve the taking of property, the actual taking of rights. And hell, again, this is putting off a very distorted version of what's truly right, because in order for something to be a wrong, there has to be a loss in property rights. So a lot of religions will distort this by not getting at the true heart and the meaning of property rights when it comes to, whatever so-called wrongs according to their doctrine. Will make the claim some external deity or entity made them engage in immoral behavior, trying to negate or shift personal responsibility. And we see this all the time in certain religious sects. Oh well, this deity, have got within me and caused me and made me act a certain way. Again, giving up personal responsibility. Don't want to take any form of accountability based on the distorted or limited information, which leads to a distortion of logic. And this is the main key thing here, is the distortion of information, limited information. What happens when you give someone limited information and you try to give them the information for them to base reality, like off of? This is what religion has been notorious for, is giving someone limited or distorted or inaccurate, information, and then they go try to build and they go try to construct, and try to co-create in reality. False religion has always been a plague to mankind, getting man to blindly believe and accept distorted worldviews, ultimately denying one's true inner kingdom and sovereignty. One of the more insidious influences of religion, aka the mind virus, is this notion of proxy care. Like this whole fake care that a lot of so-called, religious or, caring individuals seem to put off. They claim to be there out the kindness of their heart. They claim to be doing good. They claim to be doing God's work. They claim to be the mediators between you and the divine, between you and nature, between you and God. But by thy fruits you shall know them. Always look at the fruits. Then you can really truly know, like where their hands have been and where their hands are going. So her religion is one of the biggest components of or one of the biggest institutions that is spreading moral relativism. And the quote by J. Krishnamurti: when you call yourself an Indian or a Muslim or a Christian or a European or anything else, you are being violent. Do you see why it is violent? Because you are separating yourself from the rest of mankind. When you separate yourself by belief, by nationality, by tradition, it breeds violence. So a man who is seeking to understand violence does not belong to any country, to any religion, to any political system. He is concerned with the total understanding of mankind. And I've read that quote many times in my presentations, but it's such a wonderful quote because, again, you don't need to use all these labels to identify with. You should just be trying to understand the truth. And that's really the only label that, that you should care about, is seeking the truth and trying to understand it. And when you do, you try to educate and inspire others to try to understand that great truth, like you have come, like so many others have come. And how can we leave out the government, the left wing and the right wing? This institution known as the government, or external authority, who has a hallmark of moral relativistic ideology. That's like the main prime ideology when it comes to external authority. I mentioned this earlier, is how all external authority is based on moral relativistic ideology, because at some point or some level, you think that man can determine what's moral, can determine what's right and wrong. And this is how the government claims to do that, is by getting everyone to focus on legality and not morality. You see, you very rarely ever hear the word morality talked about when it comes to government. They're always talking about, is it legal? Is it legal? No, it's the question we should be asking ourselves: is it moral? Is it right? Is it just? Not is it legal? Legality? No. Is it moral? And then legality is backed by threats of coercion and violence, putting man as the supreme ruler sitting on the throne, because he gets to determine what's moral according to legality. Then therefore anybody who doesn't align to his code, to his strict rules, then therefore they get the violence and the coercion. So hell again, it's putting man on this pedestal, putting man on this throne, putting man's law above the hell natural law of what true good is, what true right is, what true wrongs are. That's what government has always done. That's what government will continue to do. The code government and its followers believe morality is based on who is in power. These people in so-called power change over time. Therefore, what is right changes. What is considered right also changes by crossing over an imaginary line. So yeah, you can, live in one piece of the area, and then you cross over this imaginary line, and it's somehow illegal. It's still moral, but it's still illegal, all because of an imaginary line. One thing can be right in one place, and you can go a mile to the next area, and it could be considered wrong. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You want to talk about how the confusion and contradiction that's being, put forth here. So let's look at what the word demoralize means. To corrupt, to undermine, to undermine the morals, to remove the morals. So where does this usually take place? If you wanted to demoralize, if you wanted to corrupt, if you wanted to undermine, particular societies, hell morals, where would you start? Where would you start? Wouldn't you start with the youth? So where does this corruption start? It starts very young. It starts in the schooling system. And I know many individuals have spoken about the dangers of the government schooling system, but what it does is it breaks the child's will. The schooling system breaks you down. It gets you to conform. It breaks your will. So when you come out of it, you are a broken individual. So what does the word broken means? It means separated by force, not whole, not integral. So what is the child? What is the individual being separated from? True thought, true creativity, true willpower, the true human essence, the true human experience, consciousness, being able to think outside the box, being able to see the bigger picture, holistic intelligence, true intelligence. And the schooling system is very demoralizing. It is very dehumanizing because it puts you through all of these animalistic trials and rituals and means of obedience to conform by way of repetition, by using positive reinforcements and negative reinforcements, and the whole operant conditioning, which was perfected by B.F. Skinner and the whole behaviorists and, like their whole theories on the environment shaping, how we think and behave. All that was tailored toward the control of the environment to tap into our animalistic qualities as a means to manipulate. And that's what we see in the schooling system. And that's why it is so dehumanizing and demoralizing, and it breaks you down. It makes you feel like you are lesser than a human being, and it treats you as though you are a animal. And the word school, what does that word mean? What does the word school mean? It has two pretty much connotations. The second noun just means training. Schooling means training, but the second noun means a group of fish or the mammals. The Proto-Indo-European prefix skill, skel, to cut, to split, to turn, which is very interesting. That one of the connotations of the etymology means to cut, to split, to turn. Yeah, to break. To cut something means to break it. To split it means to break it, to separate it. It's not integrated. It's not integral. It's not whole. So then you have the noun one form, which would be the training. The Proto-Indo-European prefix segh means to hold, to possess, to make. Hell, again, you're talking about another definition that's not associated with anything that's usually typically good. So what's being held? What's being possessed? The child's mind, the child's creativity, how they think, that willpower, that human essence, how consciousness is being possessed and being, kept on and molded by some other form of life outside of the child and the parents. So here you were treated less than, you were forced to line up, you were forced to obey, you were forced to react to a bell, just like the pigeons in Skinner's box, you were forced to conform, just like in all of the behaviorist experiments, you were forced to conform and react to a bell as though you are an animal. And this is where your will is broken and authority is shaped and molded and sculpted within your mind. So this right here is the crux of this presentation right here. This slide right here, or this picture is the most important thing that I want anyone to take from this presentation, because the corruption starts so young. It's nothing short of evil. But in reality, what has happened is the ones who are in control, the social engineers, have poisoned the stream of information, the flow of knowledge, the well of knowledge that we all drink from. They poison it with garbage data, with garbage information, toxic information, distorted information, limited information, information that isn't tailored toward higher states of consciousness. Stuff that's more focused on self, service to self. Like monetary possessions. A lot of stuff with violent, like information. A lot of violent images. A lot of news stories, that are just, all about ego and just all of this garbage data. Okay. So you have this flow of information that just exists into the ether. That's where all the aggregate data is. And we pull from that data. We draw from that, that stream of information. We drink from that well of information. Now, if we take in good knowledge into a perfect model, then that would equate to good results. But because that flow of information, because that stream of information has been poisoned, it has been distorted, it has been corrupted, we ourselves, the way man thinks, man's conscience itself is, you can say, a damn near perfect model created by nature, created by reality, created by, God, how consciousness itself, that is like the perfect model. But when you put garbage, when you put shit, when you put distorted, when you put perverted, when you put corrupted information, corrupted data, shit ass data into the perfect model, you will always get the same results. Are the results going to be perfect? No. The results are only going to be as good as the initial information which was put into it. So if we are drinking from a garbage well, if we are drinking from, a garbage stream of information that has garbage data, the outcome is going to be the same as the income. So we are getting garbage results. We are getting shit results. We are getting wrong results. We are getting incorrect results because we are being poisoned at the base level of where thought exists itself, or where thoughts can even spring up. And that's why man can't get out of this situation, because man was never given the tools to think outside of the box. So then therefore man will never ever create the conditions that are required to get outside a box, let alone even know that the box is even there, because we don't have the correct knowledge to even discern and compute that. This is why moral relativism is being spread. This is why, these two topics go hand in hand. These ideas of moral relativism are being spread by way of the perverted, grammar stage, by a weaponization of the trivium, and they are using it held against us to poison the stream of information. And therefore we drink from that poison stream, and then we never really get the true logic. We never really get the true understanding. We never really even get the true gnosis. And therefore the output, the rhetoric stage, is going to be corrupted, because it was corrupted from the initial start. And that's why we see moral relativism in everything, because they are poisoning the initial base level of thought. And the media is one of the biggest influencers. It's one of the biggest medians for this distorted information. It continues to flow. The media is the median, the energy between the sender and receiver transmitting this perverted, distorted information. The media is just another tool. It can be used for good, but unfortunately it's being used for the distortion of consciousness. And that's why the media always gives you limited information. It gives you distorted information. It gives you corrupted information. Social media, hell, the news, all of these apps, they give you limited information. It's never anything that goes in detail. It's never anything of like, true knowledge. It's all limited information to get you to have just a little bit of information, and therefore you start to build and construct your beliefs and your thoughts off of. But if it's not correct, if it's not detailed, if it's not factual information, then you can't get to that next step of logical, filtration. So again, you keep this shit flowing, this poison stream. And because we are in this constant poison shit stream, then we are putting out shit, immoral behaviors in reality. So, hell, again, another diagram. The spread of this corrupted and limited information has always been one of the greatest weapons in this battle. You keep the continuous flow of shit information constantly being flushed into people's brains. So you have reality. Of course, how the sender exists in reality. And then you have the media. If you're sending out limited information, the receiver is the individual. So you have point A being the sender, you have point B being the receiver, the individual. If you take in that distorted information, that's going to lead to distorted logic, which is a contradiction because there's no distortion in true logic, but it's only in our minds that we create those contradictions, because contradictions don't exist in reality. They don't exist in nature. So this leads to irrationality or highly emotional, reactions, internal contradictions, because we didn't have enough of the correct information to lead to a true, logical, reasonable choice. How discernment, which leads to wrong or immoral choices, wrong actions and behaviors, unjust injury. Just as though this same process can work with correct, behavior. When we take in the distorted logic, we usually call it bent, twisted, perverted, off the path, or turn. Yeah, because you took in distorted information. But just as though we can take in correct information, you have reality, you have events that happen into reality, you have that, how information being pushed out. We take in the correct knowledge as the receiver, as the individual, taking in, knowledge through our senses, through our perceptions. If it's correctly and we go through the proper system, then that should lead to true logic once that data has been gathered and filtered. Then that will lead to right action, true education, the love and the sharing of truth, because you are aligned. You see how this bottom part is a straight line compared to the upper one is bent, is turned, is off the path, is twisted. Because the information that we take in is crucial when it comes to our development and consciousness. It is crucial. It's one of the main components. That the information that we take in is one of the main components when it comes to the evolution and advancement of consciousness. And lastly, you have the entertainment, who keeps the shit, who keeps the shit flowing, who keeps the shit show flowing, who keeps all this shit plastered, like everywhere, like all over the media. You got people just looking down at the shit, constantly reprogramming themselves with positive reinforcements, with the shit, with the limited information, with the distorted information, with the corrupted and perverted information, which I'm using all those terms, synonymously. But what does the word limited mean? It means fixed. It means to restrict, to bound. Limited information is the data and information that is tailored to the restriction of thought, creation, and will. So pretty much limited information, distorted information, perverted information, corrupted information is data and information which is used to suppress human consciousness, to stop the flow of consciousness, to stop the advancement and evolution of consciousness. That's what I am talking about when it comes to limited, distorted, corrupted, and perverted health information that is being used to keep man in this animalistic, moral, relativistic mindset. You have to control man at the level of information. Therefore, anything that comes out of that information thought is going to be control itself. So a demoralized individual doesn't care for the truth. Just like Yuri Bezmenov said at the beginning, they are not concerned with principles. They only care to serve their purpose and goal. They have abandoned conscience because the mind has been broken off from the truth. They have abandoned consciousness because they was never connected to consciousness to begin with. That information was never given to them. It was never present. So they are pretty much stopping us from becoming human beings. Because what is a man? What is man? You have different connotations because you got like man in the collective, man as, the sex man, then you have man as the individual. So you have human being, you have the adult male, then the Proto-Indo-European man, the prefix man, men, was thinking, to stand out, to tower over. Because our thinking is what gets man to stand out when it comes to other individuals in nature with other animals. Our thinking is what gets us to stand out. It's not even close. If you was to look at all of the individuals underneath a microscope and just observe them, man's behavior and creation would stand out compared to all the other, life forms in the animal kingdom. We would tower over. It wouldn't even be close. All of the creations that we can do, all of the things we can cognize, all of the things we can philosophize, and everything that can be sculpted and molded and created with our hands, the power of the mind and mentation and the capacity and the will to think, we tower over all of the other creatures. So how do we break free? How does man break free from these mental chains, that they seem to love? Nothing is different. The solutions have always been the same. The solutions have always been present. Man has to discover and develop conscience. We have to discover and develop conscience. The only way to get to that discovery is with some form of initial spark. There has to be something internally that is developed within man. We can put all the information, all the correct information in front of individuals. We can have these individuals drinking from this correct organic stream of knowledge. But if they don't have that initial spark to even start, to even lift that cup up to their mouths and to drink, they will never ever start that journey. The discovery of natural law is the solution, breaking free from this mind virus. That is the only solution. Is man has to discover and have the definitive knowledge of what is right in behavior and what is wrong in behaviors, and the consequences that follow, no matter if he chooses to align with the right or if man chooses to align with the wrong. There's going to be consequences invariably for both. So man has to have this knowledge in order for true creativity to even start. Because how can man come to create with other man if there is no baseline understanding of actions and behaviors in the ethical capacity when it comes to building? You have to understand this dynamic. We have to learn to create with each other. So there has to be some baseline of morality for us to understand, for us to discover. Will that creation be based on love or fear? Conscious creation versus unconscious creation, installing moral principles into the next generation, speaking the truth at all times in all places. We have really got to penetrate the minds of the next generation and plant these seeds of truth and make it easier for them, because if they don't have that definitive knowledge of what's moral and what's immoral, they will get sucked into this collectivist cult way of thinking of moral relativism. So we have to install these moral principles. And one of the biggest things is we have to live these principles in all times, in all places, in our daily lives. Not just appear to be doing this stuff freaking online, but how are you interacting with people in your daily lives? Do you practice what you preach? Or do you just get online and just start, repeating? There has to be, again, this initial shift, this initial internal change, this transformation when you discover this true secret, this true knowledge. There's an internal shift, there's an internal change, a transmutation, a death and a rebirth. And I don't mean like the death of the ego. I mean the death of your own ignorance, and the death of knowing that you was irresponsible, and the death of you believe you knew what was right and wrong when in reality you didn't. The old self is dying. There's still aspects of it there, but the old way that you acted and think and behave has been transmuted into true essence of good. So you practice what you preach. You live these principles all day, every day, and not just talk about it online. That's one of the best ways to try to inspire others, is to live these principles every day. In all relationships, doesn't matter if it's a work environment, doesn't matter if it's, in your home, doesn't matter if you're in public, it doesn't matter where you go, you live these principles. They are a part of you. You have embodied them. You have been possessed by them. You have taken them in. That's the best way that we break free from these chains, and to lead by example. I mean, outside of that, I don't know what to tell people. I wish it was that, simple to say, hey, come on here and, here's how we break free from these chains. But again, until there is enough pressure put on the individual to force them to change themselves, then sadly, the individual will never change themselves. There has to be enough pressure put on the individual that is going to force them to change. And that's exactly what the dark occultists, the social engineers are doing, is they're putting enough pressure on the individual that change is going to come, whether it comes consciously or unconsciously. So thank you for tuning in to this presentation. I know it was a lot of information. I tried to boil it down into 1 hour, which is extremely hard. This presentation was going to be like 5 hours long, and I had to cut a lot of it back, and I had to amalgamate it all into, what it is now. Extremely hard. And maybe later on I'll, have released the full presentation. But hell, again, I want to thank you. I want to thank all of the presenters. I want to thank all of the organizers. I want to thank all of the ones who have helped, supported, and donated and spread this knowledge when it comes to, this amazing, conference. So thank you all for tuning in. And remember, we have to truly care for truth and choose the free will conscious choice of choosing the right action over the wrong action. And I'm going to give the closing words to Manly P. Hall. Peace out.
Way back in the dawn of things, when there was an argument, somebody threw a stone. And that gradually developed into a slingshot. Then we put a handle on one side of the stone and made a tommyhawk or a battle club out of it. Then we developed the bow and arrow. And then after a while, the throwing spear, which was the primitive weapon of the Western Hemisphere. We went on a little further, and somebody found out that the Chinese fired firecrackers for weddings and funerals. So we took the idea and made a cannon in order that we might shoot each other. After that got a little longer, and then everybody had a little bigger cannon. Then something else had to be accomplished in order that we should always be victorious over the adversary. And of course, the adversary was always part of ourselves. So we gradually broke up humanity into a mass of conflicting units, each struggling desperately to survive according to rules that were essentially wrong.